Welcome to the debate. Usually, when we talk about something like a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of absolute precision. It feels almost like, engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is.
Right. It's a binary state. The bone is broken, or it isn't. It's a clean, objective reality that a machine can easily capture.
Exactly. But the moment you step into the world of evaluating that same physician's actual clinical judgment, their ability to weigh competing treatment plans or navigate a patient's sensitivities or synthesize a dozen ambiguous symptoms, suddenly that x-ray machine just isn't enough.
No, absolutely not.
We are suddenly looking at an evaluation landscape that requires profound, nuanced human observation, and today we are exploring a tension that sits exactly at this intersection of objective measurement and nuanced judgment. Specifically, we are looking at the Capstone audit and certification defense process, outlined in Module 10 of the Living Professional Record, or LPR Academy.
And it really is a fascinating, highly rigorous system they've built to gatekeep this credential. For those less familiar, a Certified Living Professional Record Advisor, a CLPRA, is someone trained to help individuals build an evidentiary, deeply verified record of their professional lives. It is a highly sensitive, complex advisory role.
It is, and our central question today focuses heavily on the candidate self-remediation model that governs how someone actually earns that credential. The LPR Academy has designed a system where automated checks act as a rigid, uncompromising gatekeeper.
Very rigid.
Right. Before any human assessor even looks at a candidate's assembled final project, their mini LPR, an automated processing engine scrutinizes the submission. If it finds discrepancies, it kicks the package back to the candidate in an isolated self-remediation loop. So does shifting this entire burden of Capstone remediation to automated gates fundamentally strengthen the rigor and integrity of the credential?
Or does it ruin it?
Well, I will be arguing that this self-remediation loop is an essential, uncompromising standard. It ensures that only candidates who have truly mastered source-to-surface traceability, meaning every claim they make can be mathematically traced back to hard evidence, ever reach human review. This protects both the integrity of the certification and, frankly, the highly valuable time of the assessors.
And I will be arguing that relying so heavily on automated benchmarks and, forcing candidates into an isolated self-remediation loop risks something absolutely vital. It risks filtering out the nuanced, human-centric judgment that LPR advising fundamentally requires in the real world. By treating highly complex advisory skills like a standardized algorithmic compliance test, we are essentially abandoning candidates exactly when they need human mentorship the most to develop true advisor judgment.
I want to start by grounding this directly in the Module 10 doctrine itself, because the mandate is incredibly clear. The LPR Academy explicitly designed this not to be a graduation celebration. It is a rigorous audit.
Right.
The core doctrine states, and I am quoting the standard here, the candidate owns correction until the package is certification ready. If the automated checks find missing artifacts, missing fields, traceability errors, privacy issues, AI governance errors, or incomplete tools, the package is immediately returned with remediation instructions.
Yeah, the automated kickback.
Exactly. And the most critical part of this doctrine is that the owner, the human assessor, does not manually fix incomplete capstones. The candidate has to return to the curriculum, the examples, and the tool guides to correct the issue independently. Certification readiness must be earned.
Look, I completely acknowledge that efficiency and protecting the assessor's time are important. Assessors cannot be glorified proofreaders.
Right.
But you are focusing on the mechanical requirements while entirely bypassing the overarching philosophy of the Academy, which is certification is not worksheet completion. Certification is demonstrated advisor judgment.
Okay, but
We need to look at what the candidate is actually doing. In the Capstone, they are building complex, heavily synthesized artifacts. For example, the context reconstruction worksheet, where they have to map out the messy reality of a professional's history, or the market translation brief, where they translate that history for a specific audience. When you take those nuanced documents and return them via an automated system for a traceability error without any human guidance, you are inherently turning a complex human evaluation into a worksheet exercise.
Let's unpack that term worksheet exercise, because I think we need to be really clear about what the record automated benchmark is actually evaluating. It isn't just scanning for typos or formatting errors. It is looking for foundational failures in the LPR method.
Sure, sometimes.
Let's say a candidate gets to Tool 5B. For the listener, Tool 5B is the assembly stage. It's where the candidate takes all the raw data, the contextual mapping, and the evidence, and packages it into a cohesive mini LPR. If the automated system scans that package and finds they fail to establish a coherent source layer, meaning the evidence doesn't actually support the claims they are making, or they are missing a privacy and exclusion log, that is an objective failure. If a candidate cannot handle those baseline requirements, they fundamentally lack advisor judgment. Think back to the medical board analogy we started with. You cannot reach the nuanced oral defense of your clinical judgment if you cannot pass the baseline objective anatomy exam. An automated gate is the only way to scale this standard. How would you propose scaling a certification if highly trained human assessors are bogged down manually pointing out that a candidate forgot a Capstone cover sheet or omitted a subject consent form?
Okay, I don't disagree that missing a consent form is a binary objective failure. If they forget the form, kick it back. That's fine. But the record automated benchmark doesn't stop at administrative completeness. It compares a candidate's highly synthesized work against an official processing engine to issue a discrepancy report on deeply subjective elements.
I wouldn't call them subjective.
They are. The machine evaluates things like claim maturity and unsupported market lanes. We have to think about how a machine actually does that. It uses semantic matching and structural validation. It looks at the textual input of the final claim and tries to find a direct, mapped lineage back to the raw evidence in Tool 1B, the evidence inventory.
Right.
But how can a rigid algorithm evaluate the nuanced decision-making behind a candidate's choice to classify a piece of evidence as bridge required rather than an adjacent fit in their market translation? That requires an understanding of human context, industry norms, and subtle career transitions that a discrepancy report simply cannot grasp. The machine is performing a mechanical keyword match, but the candidate is trying to capture a professional's lived, messy reality.
But if that lived reality isn't accurately mapped in a way the methodology demands, it's just storytelling. And LPR advisors are not storytellers, they are record builders.
That's a bit reductive, don't you think?
Not at all. The entire value proposition of a living professional record is that it is verifiable. The benchmark evaluates whether the specific claim status and the privacy boundaries travel clearly from the raw evidence all the way to the final rendering. If the machine cannot mathematically trace the rendering back to the source using that semantic mapping you mentioned, that means the surface has lost its tether to the record. That isn't a subjective disagreement about how to translate a market lane. It is a fundamental failure to maintain source-to-surface discipline.
Okay, but let's look at the psychological and educational reality of what happens to the candidate in that exact moment. Let's imagine a candidate who is working on a highly complex record. They've synthesized a rendering, and the automated engine flags it because it doesn't map perfectly to the exact syntax the machine expected. The candidate is thrown into the self-remediation loop.
Which they own.
Yes. Under the Academy's rules, this triggers an FYA, a For Your Awareness notification. This is a critical mechanism. The human assessor receives this FYA, but is explicitly instructed not to act on it. The candidate just receives a mechanical discrepancy report and is told to return to the curriculum and tool guides to fix it.
Exactly, because they have to fix it themselves.
But if a candidate is genuinely struggling to resolve a complex discrepancy, say they are trying to balance an aggressive positioning hypothesis against a very sensitive privacy boundary, sending them back to a static PDF tool guide without human intervention breeds immense frustration. It doesn't breed learning. When they are staring at an error code on a highly subjective synthesis, refusing to engage with them is a dereliction of educational duty.
I have to challenge the premise that this is still part of the educational process. It is not. Modules 1 through 9 are where the teaching happens. Module 10 is explicitly defined as an audit. It is a test of independent capability.
But learning doesn't stop just because you call it an audit.
The certification-ready gate exists to protect the quality of the credential. If a candidate asks the assessor to help them fix their capstone, that request in itself proves they aren't ready to do the job. We have to remember the stakes here. LPR advisors deal with sensitive, highly confidential professional truths.
Of course.
If an advisor needs their hand held by a mentor to realize they forgot to anonymize a subject's confidential medical leave or that they accidentally exposed a third party's intellectual property in their rendering, they are fundamentally unsafe for public practice. The self-remediation loop is a necessary crucible. The machine catches the safety violations so the human assessor doesn't have to.
But safety and compliance are not the same thing as judgment. Let's look closer at that FYA versus hot list dynamic. The human assessor only gets a hot list notification, meaning they actually have to intervene when the candidate has already passed all the automated gates or if there's a literal security incident.
Right, which is the proper use of their time.
But this means the assessor's engagement is limited entirely to the very end of the process, during the final defense. You argue that they are unsafe if they make a mistake in the drafting process. But learning to navigate the tension between a client's desire to boast about an achievement and the strict reality of their actual evidence is incredibly difficult.
Yes, which is why it's tested so rigorously.
When a candidate hits a wall trying to safely translate a proof gap, an area where the client lacks evidence, into a safe rendering, that struggle is the exact moment an expert assessor could step in and provide the profound insight that turns a student into a true advisor. By relegating that moment to an automated remediation instruction, the Academy is prioritizing the assessor's schedule over the actual depth and quality of the credential.
I would argue that prioritizing the assessor's schedule is precisely what prioritizes the depth of the credential. If the assessor is buried in routine traceability corrections, explaining for the 5th time how to properly link a source document to a claim, they have no cognitive bandwidth left for the final certification defense. And that defense is where the true test of advisor judgment takes place.
Assuming they ever make it there through the automated maze.
Well, they will if they know what they're doing. But I want to push this conversation into the most high-stakes area of the capstone, because this is where I think the automated versus human debate reaches its absolute peak: the mandatory use of AI.
Ah, yes. The Module 10 update patch.
Exactly. The no AI used attestation was completely removed from the Academy. AI use is now mandatory for candidates, and because it is mandatory, it must be governed with absolute strictness. Candidates have to submit an AI use statement, a safe source packet, and crucially, a rejected AI claims log. The automated gate checks all of this simultaneously. If a candidate tries to take a shortcut, if they let the AI hallucinate a metric or dictate the professional truth of the record, the automated gate catches that ungoverned use immediately, long before it ever reaches the owner's hot list. How could a human assessor possibly review the thousands of microdecisions a candidate makes when prompting an AI? The automated gate is the only defense against AI hallucination infiltrating the LPR credential.
Look, I completely agree that AI governance is vital. Leaving AI unchecked is professional malpractice in this field. But the mechanism you just described highlights the exact flaw in relying so heavily on the automated gate.
How so?
The LPR doctrine demands that AI output must answer to the record. Mechanically, that means the candidate takes the raw AI generation, checks it claim by claim against the evidence, logs the rejected claims that the AI hallucinated, and then produces a revised human-approved output.
Correct.
Doing that correctly requires immense linguistic nuance. Let me give you a concrete example. Suppose a candidate is working with a military veteran's record. They need to creatively synthesize context to make a rendering market-ready, say, translating a military transition season into corporate operations language so a civilian hiring manager actually understands the leadership scale.
Sure.
An automated processing engine is going to scan that revised human-approved output. It is going to look for the keyword lineage back to the military source documents. It will likely fail to find the direct one-to-one vocabulary match because the candidate intentionally translated the jargon. The machine will instantly flag it as a traceability error.
Well, if it doesn't trace us,
So the strict automated gate ends up punishing the very creativity, synthesis, and nuanced market translation that the Academy supposedly demands from an elite advisor.
I understand the concern about creativity being stifled, but if we follow that logic, I have to pose a direct challenging question here.
Go ahead.
If the final surface rendering does not answer clearly to the source material in a way that even an advanced automated traceability check can verify it, isn't that a definitive failure of the LPR method?
No, because
The entire purpose of the living professional record is that it provides irrefutable, traceable proof. If a candidate's creative synthesis is so abstract or heavily translated that a processing engine cannot mathematically trace the claim back to the evidence inventory, why should a human assessor waste their time trying to decipher it? More importantly, if the Academy's machine can't verify the traceability, how on earth is a future employer or a third-party auditor going to verify it when the client takes this record into the real world?
Because human language is not code, and a future employer is not an algorithm. A future employer reads a resume rendering to understand human capability, not to audit a database.
But the database is what gives it integrity.
When a candidate takes an AI's overly polished rendering and strips it back to the truth, they might combine two relatively weak points of evidence to support a broader, more mature claim about their leadership capability.
Which needs to be logged.
Yes, but the record automated benchmark operates on discrepancy reports. It looks for missed evidence, overstated claims, or missing proof gaps. But an advisor's judgment sometimes dictates that a specific proof gap doesn't need to be highlighted in a particular rendering because the target audience doesn't value it, and omitting it doesn't make the record deceptive.
That's a slippery slope.
If the candidate makes that sophisticated, highly contextual judgment, the automated system is blind to the context. It might just throw an FYA notification saying, missing traceability on proof gap, and force them into self-remediation. What happens then? The candidate is forced to dumb down their sophisticated rendering, removing the nuance, just to satisfy the algorithm and get past the certification-ready gate.
But that dumbing down, as you call it, is exactly what the LPR method requires to maintain absolute truth. You cannot omit a proof gap just because the target audience might not care, if that omission fundamentally changes the integrity of the claim.
It doesn't always change the integrity, though.
The automated system enforces discipline. It forces the candidate to use the source-bound prompt correctly. It forces them to log the AI translation. The doctrine is every rendering must trace back to the record. Not most renderings, not the renderings that aren't too creatively complex, all of them.
I think that's too rigid.
By forcing the candidate to own the correction process, by making them return to the curriculum and satisfy these benchmarks first, the Academy ensures that only safe, competent, and fully accountable advisors reach the market. The machine strips away the ego, it strips away the storytelling, and it leaves only the verified evidence.
And in stripping away the ego and the storytelling, it risks stripping away the empathy. We have to remember that the Capstone subject, the person whose record is being built, is a human being. Whether it's the candidate's own record or a consenting friend's, navigating their professional truth requires immense psychological sensitivity.
Of course it does.
An automated discrepancy report telling a candidate they have an inconsistent ownership verb doesn't teach them how to sit with a client who feels their record proves their worth and gently correct that client's framing.
But the assessor can do that during the final defense.
I maintain that while baseline automated checks for consent forms, missing fields, and privacy logs are incredibly useful, the Academy must be incredibly careful. In its quest to protect owner time and enforce absolute mathematical traceability, it risks transforming a profound evaluation of human advisor judgment into a rigid, frustrating exercise of passing an algorithm's discrepancy report. We cannot lose the mentor in the machine.
It is a profound tension, and I think it perfectly encapsulates the challenge of modern professional certification. How do you balance the absolute need for strict, scalable protective standards with the undeniable necessity of recognizing complex, nuanced human judgment? The self-remediation loop is harsh by design. It forces the candidate to own their mistakes, but I argue it undeniably fortifies the credential.
It does fortify the credential, but we must continuously question what exactly we are fortifying. As these tools evolve,
as the record automated benchmark becomes more sophisticated at semantic mapping the line between mechanical compliance and true advisor judgment will require constant, vigilant exploration. We have to ensure that when the candidate finally reaches that oral defense, they haven't just learned how to appease a system, but how to truly advise a human being navigating their career.
And perhaps that brings us full circle to the medical analogy. The X-ray machine, no matter how advanced it gets, will never replace the physician who has to sit in the room and deliver the diagnosis. The machine provides the clarity, the human provides the care. But in the LPCR methodology, you simply cannot have the care without the clarity first. We will leave it there for today and let you, the listener, weigh the balance between the rigor of the automated gate and the necessity of human mentorship. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation next time.